Bullies cut Big Shaq daughter's hair thinking they'd break her spirit. But what follows isn't revenge, it's revelation. When truth is silenced, legacy speaks, and what rises from that floor isn't just a girl with missing curls, it's a voice the world can't ignore. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel, and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. The Florida sun poured through the tall kitchen windows like liquid gold, painting everything in a glow that felt too perfect to last. The scent of toasted bagels and fresh brewed coffee drifted through the open concept space of the O'Neal home. Modern, serene, a fortress of wealth and security. Inside, Mira O'Neal, 14 years old and just brushing the cusp of womanhood, sat at the kitchen island humming to herself. Her fingers moved confidently through her thick coils, parting them with practiced ease, as she rebraided the back row of her hair. Each twist was tight, precise, purposeful. Shaquille Big Shaq O'Neal stood across from her, stirring sugar into his oversized mug, like it was a ritual passed down through generations. His eyes, deep and weathered from years of both spotlight and shadow, were fixed on his daughter, not because she needed watching, but because every time he looked at her, he saw something rare, strength softened by grace. "You got that from your grandma," Shaq said, nodding toward her hair, his voice gravel low and soft. Lucille had that same fire in her crown. Mira didn't look up. She just smiled a little, lips tugging at the corner. "Then maybe I'll rule the world next." Shaq laughed, the deep kind of laugh that shook the counter a bit. Ain't no maybe in it. It was a perfect morning, the kind people dream of but rarely live. Sunlight, softness, safety. But even perfect mornings can carry the faint scent of storms. The envelope had come 3 weeks ago, sealed in gold foil, printed on paper thick enough to feel expensive. Meadow Ridge Academy is pleased to offer Mira O'Neal a full academic and athletic scholarship. The words were neatly typed, but the message had been louder than any celebration. This was opportunity. A gift, or so Shaq thought. The school was one of the most exclusive prep academies in the region. White stone columns, glass-paneled hallways, manicured fields that glistened like movie sets. Most kids who went there had last names tied to foundations or buildings. It was the kind of place that bragged about diversity in press releases, but panicked when real difference actually walked through the doors. Shaq had stared at that letter with pride swelling in his chest. His baby girl, brightest in the room, toughest on the court. He thought he'd done it, built a world where the battle was over before it began. He'd spent his whole life bulldozing obstacles, building wealth, buying security. He believed this was the reward. He never saw the trap. "I talked to Coach Andrews," Shaq said, sipping his coffee, watching Mira finish her braid. "Said you'll be the youngest starter in their division. That's big time, baby." Mira looked up, her face unreadable. "Yeah, it's cool." Her voice was soft, clipped. Not ungrateful. Just distracted. Like someone bracing for something they couldn't name yet. Shaq noticed. Fathers always notice, but they don't always understand. "You nervous?" he asked. She shrugged. "A little. It's different there." He came around the island and sat beside her, bumping her shoulder gently with his. "You're different too. That's what makes him stare. They ain't never seen royalty in sneakers." Mara smiled again. This time the curve in her lips lingered a little longer. He always knew what to say, but words, even the best ones, don't always stop what's coming. That afternoon, they drove to the school for orientation. The O'Neal SUV glided through rows of polished luxury cars, Range Rovers, Teslas, a Maserati idling like it owned the parking lot. Everything was orderly, precise, performative. Shaq parked by the front steps, cutting the engine. For a moment they just sat there. Mira stared out the window at the students gathering in clusters, blonde ponytails, pressed khakis, sneakers still white from the box. Their laughter carried easily across the courtyard. It had a sharpness to it, like the wind before a storm. "You ready?" Shaq asked. "Does it matter?" He turned to her, eyes narrowing just a bit. "I mean," she added quickly, "ready or not, I still gotta go in there, right?" Shaq nodded, not liking how heavy those words felt coming from a 14-year-old. But he didn't press. He reached over and placed a hand on her shoulder. "Just be you. That's all you ever need to be." She didn't respond, just opened the door, stepped out and slung her backpack over one shoulder like a soldier heading to battle. The school building rose like a courthouse, glass, steel, marble. The letters Meadow Ridge Academy gleamed in the midday sun. Shaq followed her up the steps, and the moment they entered, it felt like the air shifted. Cooler, quieter, controlled. Inside, the reception area looked like the lobby of a five-star hotel. Velvet chairs, art installations. Smiles stretched tight behind the front desk. "Welcome, Mr. O'Neal," the receptionist said with a polished smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "We're honored to have you and your daughter joining us." Mira stood slightly behind her father, clutching her schedule. She noticed how the woman's eyes kept drifting past her, like she wasn't supposed to be part of this picture. The tour was brief but telling. Shaq noticed the classroom's walls lined with Ivy League banners, textbooks thick as bricks, every kid with a laptop or tablet, not a scuff in sight. But what he noticed more was what was missing. There weren't many kids who looked like Miara. Maybe one or two. And even they looked different. Their uniforms perfectly pressed, their hair straightened or tucked away. When they passed the gym, the basketball coach, a wiry white man with a buzz cut and a forced laugh, stepped forward. "Mr. O'Neal," he said, shaking Shaq's hand a little too firmly. "Can't tell you how thrilled we are. And Miara, big shoes to fill, huh?" Miara smiled politely. It was the same smile she'd use again and again, over the coming weeks. The smile that hides everything. "I'm not trying to fill anyone's shoes," she said quietly. "I brought my own." The coach laughed, but it sounded awkward, like he hadn't expected her to talk back. Back home that evening, the house felt heavier. Shaq cooked dinner, his famous garlic lemon salmon, and Mayura sat across from him at the table, pushing rice around her plate. "You didn't eat much," he said. "Not hungry. You nervous about tomorrow?" "No, just tired." He wanted to ask more. "Push." But instead he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, worn photo. It was Lucille, his mama, dressed for a job interview in the early 80s. Her hair flat-ironed to perfection, her smile tight like she was bracing for judgment. "She used to tell me," Shaq began, placing the photo between them, "that some places weren't built for us. But that didn't mean we didn't belong." Mara looked at the photo, then at her dad. "She made you wear a suit, right? Every time. Why?" "So they wouldn't see what they were afraid of." She didn't say anything, just nodded. That night, in her room, Mayara sat in front of her mirror. Her hair was fully braided now, tight, coiled rows that framed her face like armor. She looked strong, unapologetically, but as she stared at her reflection, she felt it, that whisper of something dark rising just below the surface, like a storm still waiting on the horizon, one that didn't roar but crept in slowly, through side eyes, forced smiles and carefully chosen words. She lay in bed, but sleep didn't come easy. Her mind ran loops around the hallway glances, the tight laughs, the eyes that looked through her. Somewhere between fear and determination, a new voice started whispering inside her. "They won't break me." And yet, she knew, the hardest part hadn't even started. The storm was coming, and it wasn't going to be loud. It was going to be quiet. It was going to look like kindness. It was going to cut deeper than words. Sasha giggled. "She's got that face like she's mad all the time." "It's probably the Detroit thing," Delaney added. "They're raised to be intense." Mayara froze. Her heart thudded once, hard, and then kept going as if trying to break through her chest. She didn't move, didn't speak. She knew better than to interrupt that kind of conversation. They didn't know she'd heard. Or maybe they did. Maybe they wanted her to. At practice, Delaney passed to every player but her. When Mira scored during a scrimmage, Delaney clapped with slow, sarcastic precision. "Wow, that's impressive. Like beast mode stuff." The other girls laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was safer to laugh than to stand in silence. That night, Miara sat on the floor of her bathroom, legs crossed, toothbrush lying on the counter untouched. She stared at her reflection, her braids framing her face like question marks. She wasn't crying. Not yet. She remembered something her dad had said once. "The hardest thing ain't taking a hit. It's knowing when not to swing back." She wondered how many hits she could take before her silence started looking like surrender. The next day brought no relief. In biology, Mr. Carter asked a question about cells. Mira answered confidently, accurately. The room went quiet, then slowly filled with murmurs. Delaney raised her hand and asked if Mira had studied ahead. Her tone was laced with doubt, like it wasn't possible that Mira could just know the answer. Later in gym class, Sasha accidentally brushed against Mira hard enough to knock her off balance. Oops, she said with a smile. Mira clenched her jaw but kept walking. This was how it built, slowly, deliberately, until it filled every room she entered. At home, she didn't say much. Shaq noticed the shift. Her answers were shorter, her appetite thinner. When he asked how school was, she said fine, and smiled in that practiced way that made him ache inside. He wanted to press, but he also knew his daughter. Mira wasn't the type to break open easily. On Friday, the worst of it came. It started in the locker room again. After gym, most of the girls had already left. Mira was alone, tying her shoes when Delaney, Sasha, and Caitlin walked in laughing too loudly. "Hey, Mira," Delaney said, sitting on the bench across from her. "You ever think about straightening your hair? I mean, just to switch it up?" Mira didn't answer. "It might be fun," Delaney continued. "You know, just to look a little more polished. Not so wild. Not so Detroit," Sasha added under her breath. Mira stood up slowly. "I like it the way it is." Delaney tilted her head. "Of course. I mean, it's very authentic." There was silence. Not the peaceful kind. The kind that waits for someone to snap. But Mira didn't give them what they wanted. She picked up her bag and walked out. Behind her, she heard Caitlin say, "God, she's so sensitive." As if surviving 1,000 paper cuts, and finally flinching made her fragile. That night, Mira braided her hair tighter than usual. Each twist pulled hard at her scalp. She welcomed the sting. It was something real. Something she could control. She stared at her reflection again. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. But something inside her started to shift. Harden. At Meadow Ridge, no one threw punches. No one shouted slurs in hallways. It wasn't that kind of war. It was subtler, cleaner, sharper, like a knife disguised as a compliment. And Mira was bleeding quietly. Alone. But even wounds hidden from sight eventually leave scars. And scars tell stories, whether people want to hear them or not. Mira hadn't wanted to go. Every inch of her resisted the idea of being trapped overnight, with people who wore fake kindness like it was a badge of honor. But it was mandatory for the soccer team, and she was expected to attend. No exceptions. No excuses. The lodge was divided into dorm-style bunk rooms. Mira was placed with Delaney, Sasha, Caitlin, and 2 other girls she didn't know well. The room smelled of too sweet body spray and anxiety. Laughter rang out in bursts, quick and sharp. Whenever someone passed Mira, a side glance and whispered something just out of her ear's reach. She kept her head down, unrolling her sleeping bag, and placing it neatly at the farthest corner bunk. Her headphones went in before the first conversation even started, but she didn't play anything. Silence was a better armor than music. That evening, after dinner and forced trust falls, the girls were sent back to the lodge to shower and change. There were 2 locker rooms on either side of the hallway, mirrored in layout, white-tiled stainless steel benches running through the middle. The air inside carried the sting of disinfectant and damp socks. Mira entered the locker room last, moving like a shadow. She took a spot at the end, away from the others. She laid out her things, clean leggings, a fresh tee, her comb and edge brush. She untied her scarf, gently loosening the braids that had held together through hours of sweat and strain. She was in the process of running her fingers through the thick coils at her roots when she heard them. Delaney's voice came first, bouncing off the tiles with too much sweetness. "Hey, Mira, you got a sec?" Mela froze, her hands halfway through her scalp. She glanced up to see Delaney, Sasha, and Caitlin entering the room together. Their footsteps loud, their eyes locked on her like they had practiced this. Something in the air shifted, the way it does before a storm, still, cold, heavy. "I just wanted to say something real quick," Delaney continued, stepping closer. Her tone was soft, but something in her eyes betrayed the calm. "We've been kinda hard on you, you know. Adjusting here can be tough. We were thinking we should clear the air." Mira said nothing. She knew when a performance was in motion. She'd seen it before. The setup, the false sincerity, the crowd ready to clap on cue. Before she could respond, Caitlin moved to the locker behind her, and Sasha flanked her other side. Delaney took one more step forward, and slowly reached into her oversized hoodie pocket. What she pulled out made Mira's chest seize. A pair of scissors. They weren't plastic. These were real silver, sharp, gleaming under the buzzing fluorescent lights. Delaney twirled them in her hand like they were part of a magic trick. Her smile never broke. "Don't worry," she said. "We're not gonna hurt you. Just a makeover. Something less intense." Sasha laughed. Low and breathy. Yeah, you're making the rest of us look bad with that lion's mane. Mira stood, instantly backing away, but Caitlin blocked her. Relax, she muttered. You're always so tense. Move, Mira said, her voice calm even, but laced with warning. Delaney didn't move. She stepped closer. The scissors opened, closed. Click, click. Come on, Delaney said. You can say thank you after. We're helping you fit in. And then in a motion too fast to stop, Delaney reached forward and grabbed a thick twist of Mira's hair. There was no real struggle. That was the most horrifying part. Mira stood frozen. And in that stillness, there was a sharp metallic snip. A long curl, thick and coiled, dropped to the tile floor like a piece of her soul. Then another snip. Another snip. Each sound louder than the last. Louder than breath. Louder than blood in her ears. Mira didn't scream. She didn't cry. She just stood, heart pounding, eyes locked straight ahead, as pieces of herself, of her mother, of Lucille, of every O'Neal woman before her fell at her feet. The laughter wasn't hysterical. It was worse. It was soft, triumphant. Sasha clapped once, mockingly. Caitlin took a photo. She didn't even try to hide it. And then a sound Mira didn't expect cut through the room. A door opening. In the doorway stood Ms. Renner, the assistant chaperone, a young teacher, new, quiet, the kind who always said, "I'm here if you need anything," but rarely followed through. She saw it. She saw everything. Delaney standing with scissors in hand. Mira's curls on the ground. The smirks. The tension. Ms. Renner's eyes went wide, and then she stepped back, pulled the door closed, and walked away. No word, no question, no report. Silence. Weaponized. After a beat, Delaney set the scissors on the bench, adjusted her ponytail, and whispered, "You'll thank us later." They left laughing, their voices echoing down the hallway like ghosts. Mira didn't move for a full minute. Her legs trembled, but her face remained still. Then slowly, she knelt. Not to cry, not to collapse. She picked up the pieces, one by one, gathering the strands like they were precious. Holy, she found a Ziploc bag in her duffel, put the hair inside, sealed it, and stood. When she walked out, the hallway was empty. Her head was uneven now, parts of her scalp exposed. Her silhouette changed, but her back was straight, her gaze forward. No one stopped her. No one asked. That night on the bus ride home, she sat alone by the window, her hood up, her fingers tight around the plastic bag in her lap. The voices of the others swirled around the bus, recounting games, joking, scrolling through their phones. No one looked at her, like it hadn't happened. As they pulled into the Meadow Ridge parking lot, Mira saw Shaq's SUV waiting in the glow of the street lamps. He was outside the car, leaning against the hood, arms crossed, watching the bus pull in, his face unreadable. His frame still. She stepped off, her steps slow, shoulders squared. As soon as he saw her face, his eyes narrowed. He knew. Fathers always know. But even he wasn't ready for what she handed him. She reached into her bag, pulled out the Ziploc, pressed it into his hand, his brow furrowed. Then he looked down. The breath left his body like it had been punched out of him. He dropped to the curb, hands still gripping the bag, knees bent like he couldn't hold up the weight of it. Shaq didn't speak. Mira didn't either. She just stood there, broken and whole, at the same time, watching the strongest man she knew crumble under the quietest kind of violence. The kind that leaves no bruise, but still bruises everything. They drove home in silence. No music, no talk, just the sound of wheels on pavement, and the zip of the bag sitting on the console between them. When they got home, Shaq didn't go to his room. He sat at the kitchen table, lights off, the bag in front of him, hands folded, staring. Mira went upstairs. Into the bathroom. She looked in the mirror. What was left of her hair sat in twisted clumps. She took a deep breath, picked up the comb, and began to undo the damage. She didn't cry, because crying would have meant they had taken something she wasn't willing to give. What they took was already gone. But what remained, what pulsed in her chest, in her spine, in every defiant breath, was hers. And no one could snip that away. Shaquille O'Neal sat at the edge of his daughter's bed, the weight of the small plastic bag in his hand heavier than any championship trophy he'd ever lifted. Inside it lay the truth, silent, severed, coiled pieces of Mira's pride, cut from her scalp without warning, without mercy. His palm trembled, and the edges of the bag crackled faintly in the quiet room. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was thick. It clung to the walls. It settled in his chest. And Shaq, the man the world only knew as big, bold, and unbreakable, didn't speak. He could. Mira sat across from him, her back against the headboard, arms wrapped around her knees, eyes fixed on nothing. Her head was wrapped in a soft scarf, not for shame, but for rest. The weight of the day had folded her inward, but not broken her. She hadn't told him everything. She didn't need to. The bag said it all. "I failed you," he said, voice low and rough. "I didn't see it coming." Mira didn't respond. And that silence? That's what cut the deepest. Because it wasn't the kind of silence that begged for words. It was the kind that carried them all. Shaq stood slowly, walked to her dresser, and set the bag down gently, like it might shatter. He glanced once more at his daughter, then turned to leave. His steps were slow, deliberate, like each one had to be earned. Downstairs, the house was dark except for the golden underglow beneath the kitchen cabinets. The light was automatic, but tonight it felt like something more, like the house itself refused to sit fully in darkness. Shaq moved to the kitchen table, the one they rarely used because they usually ate on the couch or around the island. He pulled out a chair, dropped into it with a thud that echoed through the quiet, and put his head in his hands. The last time he'd felt this helpless was when his mom, Lucille, had been turned away from a bank loan application because she lacked the right image. Shaq had only been 11 then. He remembered how she'd cried in the car, not loud, not dramatic, just a few tears running down her cheek, her eyes staring straight ahead as if even blinking would be admitting defeat. When he asked her why they didn't get the loan, she'd forced a smile and said, "Because sometimes the world doesn't see us unless we shrink first." He didn't understand it then. But now, looking at his daughter's hair in that bag, he felt those words rise from his chest like smoke. Lucille had straightened her hair for interviews, pressed it flat and sharp so it looked professional. She wore beige tones, small gold earrings, never red. "Keep it soft," she used to say. "Don't scare them. Scare them." That's what Maura had done, without saying a word. Just by being, just by walking in with her curls intact, her back straight, her eyes level. She didn't shrink. She didn't code switch. She didn't apologize for taking up space. And so they punished her for it. Shaq stared at the wall, at the framed photo of Mayra, from her last birthday, beaming beside a cake with purple frosting and basketball candles. That girl hadn't gone anywhere, but pieces of her had been stolen. He didn't want revenge. He was too old for that, too seasoned. Revenge was a fire that burned everyone, even the ones who lit it. What he wanted was something far sharper. He wanted the truth, not loud, not viral, but undeniable. Shaq picked up his phone and dialed Lucille. She answered on the third ring. "Shaquille." He paused, then exhaled. "Mama." They cut her hair. A breath caught on the other end. Not a gasp. Just the sound of a memory clawing its way to the surface. "They did what?" She brought it home. In a bag. They held her down in a locker room. Cut it off like it was nothing. Called it a makeover. Silent. Then Lucille's voice. Low and level. "And what are you gonna do?" "I'm not gonna shout," he said. "I'm gonna show them what the quiet can do." Lucille didn't need to ask more. "You already know how, baby. You've always known how." He hung up, moved like a man carrying something holy. Upstairs, Mira had closed her door. He stood in the hallway outside it, hand on the wood. He didn't knock. He just said it through the silence. "They don't get to decide who you are." The next morning, Shaq rose before sunrise. He went into his office, pulled out the stack of legal documents and account records he rarely touched anymore. Years ago, he'd set up investment funds, shell companies, portfolios under various trusts, not for secrecy, but for strategy. He'd been a business student before a ball player, and now all that preparation had finally found a purpose. He made 2 calls, one to a friend in Atlanta who specialized in corporate acquisition and educational trusts, the second to a legal consultant who knew how to make pressure without threats. By 9:30 a.m., the gears were already turning. Quiet, sharp, purposeful. He didn't post anything online. He didn't threaten lawsuits. He didn't go to the press. Instead, he started building something no one could ignore. At noon, he requested a private meeting with the Meadow Ridge administration. The headmaster, 2 senior board members, and the school's legal advisor were present, Shaq sat across from them in a tailored charcoal suit, no tie, no flash, just present. "We appreciate you coming in, Mr. O'Neal," the headmaster said, forced calm in his voice. "We're aware there was an incident involving your daughter." Shaq held up a hand. "No," he said simply. "You're aware of what you want to be aware of. Let's talk about what really happened." He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a tablet, opened a file, pressed play. The room fell into a stunned hush as the security footage began to roll. Shaq had acquired it less than 24 hours after the incident, thanks to someone on the inside. Someone who didn't want to be named, but didn't want to keep living in silence either. The angle wasn't perfect, but it was enough. Delaney. The scissors, the smirks, the teacher walking in, pausing, and walking away. When the video ended, Shaq didn't speak. He let the silence do the work. The headmaster's jaw worked uselessly for a moment. "Mr. O'Neal, we had no idea that you didn't want to know," Shaq replied, his voice steady, not raised. "And now you do." The board member on the left shifted uncomfortably. "How did you? You've had blind spots," Shaq said. "I don't." He stood up, straightened his coat. "I'm not asking for punishment. I'm not asking for apologies. I'm asking for accountability." He reached into the briefcase again and handed them a folder. "Consider this your notice. As of this morning, I hold a financial stake in Meadow Ridge's parent trust through a private fund. Legal, transparent. I've already signed on as an observing member of the board." The room went still. Shaq smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "This isn't personal. It's principle." He left them sitting there, stunned, paperwork in hand, truth ringing louder than outrage. That night, back at home, Miara sat at the kitchen table with her math homework. Her hair was pulled back into a simple puff, clean, uneven in places, but still regal. She hadn't spoken much all day, but when Shaq sat down beside her with a quiet plate of food, she looked up. "Did you do something?" Shaq glanced at her, then nodded. "I made sure they saw you." Miara's lip twitched, but she didn't smile. "Not yet." "You didn't post about it?" "Nope." "You didn't tell the media?" "Nope." She stared at him a long moment. Then she whispered, "Why not?" He reached across the table, tapped the top of her hand once. Solid grounding. "Because I'm not fighting for likes," he said. "I'm fighting for the room to never go quiet when this happens again." Miara looked down, and this time she let the smallest tear fall. Not because she was broken, but because now, finally, someone had listened without waiting for her to scream. And she knew that silence, in the right hands, could shake the whole world. Shaquille O'Neal sat at the kitchen table, his massive hands clasped together, knuckles white. Across from him, Miara stared at her untouched breakfast, the air between them thick with unspoken words. The incident at Meadow Ridge had left a scar deeper than the uneven patches on her scalp. Shaq had taken steps, quiet, calculated moves within the school's financial structure, but the administration's response had been tepid at best. "They're denying it," Shaq finally said, his voice a low rumble, "claiming it's a misunderstanding." Miara's eyes flicked up, a spark of frustration igniting. "A misunderstanding? They held me down and cut my hair. Dad, I know, baby. I know." He reached across the table, covering her hand with his, but without concrete evidence. "They're sweeping it under the rug." The doorbell rang, cutting through the tension. Shaq rose, his towering frame moving toward the door. On the porch stood a courier, holding a small, nondescript package. "Delivery for Mr. O'Neal," the man said, handing over a tablet-sized box. Shaq thanked him, closing the door and examining the package. No return address. He carried it back to the kitchen, setting it between them. Miara raised an eyebrow. "What is it?" "Only one way to find out." Shaq opened the box, revealing a USB drive atop a folded piece of paper. He unfolded the note, reading aloud. Subject line, "Watch this." They exchanged a glance. Shaq plugged the USB into his laptop, opening the single video file contained within. The screen flickered to life, displaying grainy footage of the Meadow Ridge locker room. The scene unfolded, Miara entering, the other girls following. Their predatory smiles, Delaney Pierce producing the scissors. The struggle, the laughter as Miara's curls fell to the floor. Then, the most damning moment. A teacher, Mrs. Caldwell, stepping into the frame, pausing, then turning and walking away. Miara's breath hitched. She saw, and did nothing. Shaq's jaw tightened, his eyes never leaving the screen. This isn't just bullying. This is a system trained to look away. He closed the laptop, the room plunging into a heavy silence. We have the tape. Now we make them watch. The next morning, Shaq requested a meeting with the Meadow Ridge administration. The headmaster, Dr. Whitaker, sat behind his expansive mahogany desk, flanked by Mrs. Caldwell and the school's legal counsel. Mr. O'Neal, Dr. Whitaker began, his tone placating. We understand your concerns, but as we've stated, there's no evidence to support these allegations. Shaq reached into his bag, retrieving the laptop. I believe this will change your mind. He placed it on the desk, pressing play. The room fell silent as the events unfolded on screen. Mrs. Caldwell's face paled, her hands trembling in her lap. When the video ended, Shaq leaned forward, his voice calm but firm. Explain this. Dr. Whitaker cleared his throat, flustered. I don't know where you obtained this, but this is highly irregular. What's irregular? Shaq interrupted. Is your staff witnessing an assault and choosing to ignore it? Mrs. Caldwell stammered. I didn't know what to do. You thought it was easier to walk away. Shaq finished for her. Easier to protect the school's image than my daughter's dignity. The legal counsel interjected. Mr. O'Neal, perhaps we should discuss this matter privately. Shaq's eyes bore into him. No, we're discussing it now, publicly, because this isn't just about Miara. It's about every student who suffered while you turned a blind eye. Dr. Whitaker sighed. Defeated. What do you want? Accountability, Shaq stated. Immediate disciplinary action against those involved, including staff. A public acknowledgement of the incident. And a comprehensive review of your policies to ensure this never happens again. The headmaster nodded slowly. We'll convene the board and take the necessary steps. Shaq stood towering over them. See that you do. Because if you don't, this tape won't just be in this room. It'll be everywhere. In the days that followed, Meadow Ridge released a statement, acknowledging the incident, and outlining their commitment to change. Delaney Pierce and the other students faced suspension, while Mrs. Caldwell resigned amid public outcry. Nora returned to school, her head held high, her natural curls beginning to regrow. She walked the halls with a newfound resilience, her father's unwavering support fortifying her spirit. One afternoon, as she gathered her books from her locker, a timid voice spoke behind her. Mira. She turned to see Jenna Carlisle, a quiet girl from her English class, clutching her notebook tightly. Hey Jenna, what's up? Jenna glanced around nervously. I was the one who sent the tape. Mira's eyes widened. That was you. Jenna nodded, tears brimming. I couldn't stand by and watch them hurt you. It wasn't right. Emotion swelled in Mira's chest. She reached out, pulling Jenna into a heartfelt embrace. Thank you. You don't know how much that means to me. Jenna sniffled, a small smile breaking through. Maybe now things will change. Mira nodded, determination lighting her gaze. They will, because we're going to make sure of it. Together they walked down the hallway, two voices united against the silence, ready to challenge a system that had for too long chosen to look away. The letter came on a quiet Tuesday, wrapped in a plain cream envelope, with Mira's name handwritten in careful cursive on the front. There was no postage stamp, no return address, just her name, Mira, written with the kind of intention that made it feel more like a prayer than mail. She found it tucked into the side of her notebook, slipped in sometime between second period and lunch. No one had seen it happen. No one took credit, but the handwriting was familiar, elegant, strong, like the woman herself. Lucille O'Neal had always been a powerful presence in Mira's life, even when she wasn't in the room. She was the reason Mira braided her hair with pride, the reason she knew how to walk into any space without lowering her gaze. Big Shaq might have been the anchor, but Lucille was the flame. Mira waited until the house was still that night, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound keeping the dark company. She sat cross-legged on her bed, the envelope in her lap, her fingers hesitant but ready. She opened it slowly, like it might change shape if she moved too fast. Inside was a single sheet of stationery, the kind Lucille always used, thick and lined in faded gold. The ink was deep blue. The first line was written without greeting. Just, baby, your hair isn't the problem. Their fear. Mira's eyes locked on the words, the weight of them curling around her spine like arms that knew exactly where she hurt. When I was your age, I didn't wear my hair how I wanted. I wore it how the world expected. burned it straight with hot combs every Sunday, sat still while it smoked, because I was told neatness mattered more than comfort. I thought if I made myself smaller, smoother, quieter, I'd be safer. I was wrong. She paused. Her chest already ached, and she hadn't even reached the middle. Her fingers gripped the edge of the page as if the paper might blow away and take the words with it. I remember once, I begged your great-grandmother to let me go natural. She looked at me like I'd asked to walk into war barefoot. She didn't say no. She said, Lucille, I want you to be proud, but I need you to be alive. And so I kept burning. I kept straightening. I kept softening my voice and hiding my truth, because surviving felt more important than standing tall.
Mimura could see her grandmother writing it, could imagine her pausing between thoughts, the pen pressed to her lips, remembering the kind of silence that teaches you how to disappear just to stay visible.
When your daddy was born, I told myself I'd raise him different, and when you came along, I knew you would be the generation that didn't bow. But baby, I forgot one thing. The world doesn't just let go of old habits. Sometimes it gets sharper when it's afraid it's losing power. The tears came before me. Mira knew they had. Not loud, not dramatic, just steady, full. They slid down her cheeks as if they'd been waiting weeks to be released. This wasn't grief. This wasn't rage. It was something deeper. Something that lived in her bones. They didn't cut your hair to style you. They cut it to silence you. To tame something they didn't understand. But what they didn't know, what they still don't, is that our roots don't start at the scalp. They start in our blood, in our stories, in women who never had the chance to scream, so they passed down their roar instead. Miura pressed the page against her heart for a moment, closing her eyes, breathing it in like air. Her mind flicked to her mother, whom she barely remembered but often dreamed of. Her soft voice, her gentle fingers in her hair, singing while she braided. She imagined Lucille beside her now, hands steady, eyes fierce. You are not weak because you cried. You are not soft because you stayed silent. Strength, real strength, is knowing you don't have to prove your pain to be believed. You are fire, Maura, and fire don't flinch when it's struck. It burns brighter. She wept harder now, her fingers curling around the paper like it was the only thing keeping her tethered. For the first time since the locker room, she let it come. The hurt, the confusion, the humiliation, but also the release. The letter wasn't a balm. It wasn't meant to erase what had been done. It was something more sacred. A reminder. A call to rise. I see you. I see every piece of you they tried to take. I see the way you walk taller now, even with part of your crown missing. But baby, remember, your hair will grow back. Your roots were never in question. And neither is your worth. Mira folded the letter slowly, her breathing unsteady. She slipped it into the journal on her nightstand, placing it beneath the photo of her and Shaq from her 13th birthday. She traced the edge of the picture, then leaned back against her pillow, her eyes on the ceiling. The house was still quiet, but inside her something had shifted. She wasn't just her father's daughter. She was Lucille's granddaughter. She was the daughter of women who had endured without ever letting the world see them crack. And now, it was her turn, not to endure silently, but to rise loudly. Her tears dried slowly, leaving her cheeks warm, and her eyes clear. She would wear her curls again, not as defiance, but as declaration. She would walk back into those halls, not for them but for every girl watching from the corners, unsure if they were allowed to take up space. Because now, Miara understood something she hadn't before. They had taken something from her, but they had also awakened something in her, and that something would never bow again. Shaquille O'Neal sat in his expansive home office, the glow from his laptop illuminating his contemplative expression. The recent events at Meadow Ridge had ignited a fire within him, a father's fury tempered by strategic acumen. He knew that confronting the school directly might yield temporary solutions, but systemic change required a more profound approach. His fingers danced over the keyboard as he delved into the school's financial underpinnings. Meadow Ridge operated as a private institution, its financial health reliant on a complex web of trusts and endowments. With his extensive business experience, Shaq recognized an opportunity hidden within these financial structures. Over the next few weeks, through a meticulously crafted shell company, Shaq began acquiring a significant stake in Meadow Ridge's financial trust. The process was discreet, each move calculated to avoid drawing attention. By the time he was done, he held a controlling interest, an unassailable position that granted him access to the school's highest decision-making echelons. The day of the board meeting arrived. The conference room buzzed with the usual pre-meeting chatter among trustees and administrators, oblivious to the seismic shift about to occur. As the meeting commenced, Shaq made his entrance, his towering presence commanding immediate attention. Murmurs rippled through the room. His involvement was unexpected. Dr. Whitaker, the headmaster, cleared his throat, attempting to mask his surprise. "Mr. O'Neal, to what do we owe this?" Shaq raised a hand, silencing him. "As a major stakeholder, I believe it's time we address some pressing issues." He moved to the center of the room, placing a laptop on the polished mahogany table. With a deliberate click, he played the unedited footage of Miura's assault. The room fell into a stunned silence, the air thick with discomfort as the undeniable truth unfolded before them. As the video ended, Shaq's voice was calm, but carried the weight of restrained fury. This institution, esteemed for its excellence, harbors a darkness that can no longer be ignored. He turned to face the board members, his gaze piercing. Delaney Pierce, Margaret Hughes, Olivia Stanton, these students perpetrated the assault. Mrs. Caldwell, a trusted educator, witnessed the act and chose inaction. Dr. Whitaker's face drained of color. "Mr. O'Neal, we had no knowledge." Shaq cut him off, his tone unwavering. "Ignorance is not an excuse. It's a symptom of a deeper malaise, a culture of silence and complicity." He let the weight of his words settle before continuing. "Effective immediately, I demand the expulsion of the involved students and the termination of Mrs. Caldwell's employment. Furthermore, I propose a comprehensive review of the school's policies on diversity, inclusion, and student safety." The room was thick with tension, the board members exchanging uneasy glances. Dr. Whitaker, realizing the gravity of the situation, nodded slowly. "Your concerns are valid, Mr. O'Neal. We will take the necessary actions." Shaq's eyes narrowed. "Actions speak louder than words. Dr. Whitaker, I expect prompt and decisive measures." In the days that followed, Meadow Ridge witnessed a reckoning. The implicated students were expelled, and Mrs. Caldwell resigned in disgrace. Dr. Whitaker, bearing the weight of institutional failure, tendered his resignation, acknowledging his inability to uphold the school's values. Shaq addressed a gathering of parents, students, and faculty in the school's auditorium. His voice resonated with a blend of authority and empathy. "This isn't about revenge. It's about restitution, restoring the integrity of this institution, and ensuring that every student feels safe, valued, and respected." He paused, allowing his words to sink in. "Change isn't easy. It requires us to confront uncomfortable truths and commit to continuous growth. But together we can build a Meadow Ridge that stands as a beacon of inclusivity and excellence." The audience erupted into applause, the collective sentiment echoing a newfound hope. Shaq's strategic intervention had not only addressed the immediate injustice, but had also set the foundation for enduring transformation within the school's culture. The lawsuits came fast and loud. Within days of the boardroom explosion, Meadow Ridge's pristine hallways became the epicenter of media frenzy. Delaney Pierce's parents were the first to strike. Their statement came through polished lawyers with expensive pens and deliberate language. "Defamation, character assassination, irreparable emotional harm. We intend to pursue legal action against Mr. O'Neal for slandering our daughter's name and reputation." The lawyer read aloud to a crowd of reporters outside the Pierce estate, where cameras snapped every shift in expression on the mother's powdered face. This was a prank taken out of context. A prank. Shaq watched the press conference from home, arms folded, eyes narrowed. He didn't react, not yet. He had seen it coming. This was how power worked, not by apologizing, but by rebranding cruelty as misunderstood humor. But what Delaney's parents didn't know, what none of them knew, was that the next strike wasn't coming from Shaq. It was coming from someone they never noticed. Jenna Carlisle had always been invisible at Meadow Ridge. A scholarship student from the east side of the city, she was the daughter of Joseph Carlisle, the janitor who mopped the auditorium after school concerts and cleared gum from under cafeteria tables, mixed race, quiet and plain by Meadow Ridge standards. Jenna floated through the hallways like a shadow. No one bullied her, but no one ever spoke to her either. She wasn't part of the social hierarchy. She was the floor they walked on. But what they didn't know was that Jenna had been watching. She had seen the whispers, heard the laughs, witnessed the subtle digs and microaggressions. Miura endured every day. She'd been there cleaning the hallway outside the gym when Miura walked out with her curls uneven and her face unreadable, and Jenna had felt something crack open inside her, a rage she didn't know she could carry. Because she knew that silence too. It lived in her skin. She had started recording incidents weeks earlier, not out of malice, out of necessity. She'd seen how the school worked, how teachers overlooked things, how cameras mysteriously glitched when truth was inconvenient. So she used what she had: her phone, her eyes, her silence. When she sent that first email to Shaq with the locker room footage, she hadn't expected a response. But when the boardroom fell silent under the weight of that truth, she knew the time would come when she'd need to step out of the shadows. That time was now. She called a local journalist, known for hard-hitting investigative stories, Lena Mercer, the same woman who had followed Mira's story in its early days. They met in a quiet coffee shop near Jenna's neighborhood, tucked away from the noise of downtown. "I was the one who sent the footage," Jenna said, her voice soft but sure. Lena leaned forward, eyes wide. "Yeah." Jenna nodded. "I have more. Recordings, notes, screenshots. They weren't just cruel to Miura. They've been like this for years. And no one's ever believed us because we don't come from money." Lena didn't speak for a moment. Then she said the only thing that mattered.
"Let's tell your story."
The next day, the article hit the internet like lightning in a dry forest. The voice they never noticed. The janitor's daughter who burned down the lie. The headline splashed across every major platform. Inside, the piece unfolded with brutal clarity. Jenna's testimony. Her audio files, screenshots of group chats where Delaney and her friends mocked Miura, planned the makeover, shared pictures of the aftermath with laughing emojis. But more than the evidence, it was Jenna's voice that shook people. "I wasn't surprised they hurt Miura," the article quoted. "What shocked me was how quickly everyone let them." She talked about the teacher who walked away, about the principal who asked her dad to keep rumors under wraps, about how she'd cleaned vomit off floors while listening to students joke about how people like her and Miura only got into Meadow Ridge for diversity numbers. The article went viral within hours. Celebrities retweeted it. Civil rights advocates shared it. Activists called Jenna brave. Overnight, the quiet girl became a symbol of something much louder. A reckoning not just with racism, but with the arrogance of institutions that mistake silence for permission. Delaney's parents went silent. The lawsuit threats disappeared. In their place came a carefully worded statement. "We are deeply saddened by the recent revelations and are working with the school to ensure accountability at all levels." But the damage was done. Because the truth had a voice now. And it wasn't coming from where they thought it would. Jenna walked into school the next day to a strange, almost reverent quiet. People looked at her now, really looked. Not with pity, not with curiosity, with recognition. Miura found her in the courtyard, where the benches were always cold, but the light was just right. "You didn't have to do that," Miura said. Jenna shrugged, but her eyes were steady.
"I did."
Miura sat beside her, pulling her curls into a loose ponytail. "You changed everything." "No," Jenna said. "You did. I just made sure they listened." For a long moment, neither spoke. They didn't need to. They understood something most people never would. The power of seeing and being unseen. The ache of being invisible, until it's convenient to be remembered. Together they watched as a new kind of silence settled over Meadow Ridge. Not the silence of complicity. The silence before change. Because now the voice they never noticed was leading the conversation. And the people who used to speak over them had finally run out of words. Months had passed since Mamara O'Neal had walked the halls of Meadow Ridge. The seasons had shifted, and with them, so had she. Today marked the beginning of a new chapter, a new school, a fresh start. As she stood before the full-length mirror in her bedroom, she took a deep breath, absorbing the reflection staring back at her. Her hair, once a source of contention and pain, now cascaded in bold, free curls down her shoulders. Each strand seemed to whisper stories of resilience, echoing the strength of her ancestors. No longer confined by the expectations of others, Mera embraced her natural beauty with unapologetic pride. "Ready, sweetheart?" Shaquille O'Neal's deep voice resonated from the doorway. He leaned against the frame, a soft smile playing on his lips as he observed his daughter. Mera turned to face him, her eyes alight with determination. "More than ever, Dad." The drive to the new school was filled with a comfortable silence, both father and daughter lost in their thoughts. Upon arrival, Miara noticed the stark contrast to Meadow Ridge. The student body was a tapestry of diversity, each individual adding to the vibrant mosaic of the institution. It was a place where differences were celebrated, not shunned. As she walked through the corridors, heads turned, not in judgment, but in admiration. Her presence commanded respect, not just because of her lineage, but because of the aura she exuded. Confidence, strength, freedom. Weeks turned into months, and Miara thrived. She joined clubs, excelled in her studies, and formed bonds that were genuine and untainted by prejudice. Her experiences had ignited a passion within her, a desire to advocate for those whose voices were often silenced. It was this fervor that led her to the podium tonight. The auditorium buzzed with anticipation. The Youth Advocacy Award was a prestigious honor, recognizing young individuals who had made significant contributions to social justice and equality. Miara stood backstage, clutching the edges of her speech, her heart pounding in her chest. "You're up next," a coordinator whispered, offering an encouraging nod. Taking a deep breath, Miara stepped onto the stage. The applause was thunderous, but she remained composed, approaching the microphone with grace. As the clapping subsided, she scanned the audience, her eyes landing on her father seated in the front row. His expression was one of unwavering pride. "Good evening," she began, her voice steady yet emotive. "I stand before you not as the daughter of a celebrity, but as a young woman who has faced adversity and chosen to rise above it." She recounted her journey, the microaggressions, the assault on her identity, the pain of being ostracized. But she also spoke of healing, of reclaiming her narrative, and of the power that lies in embracing one's true self. "They tried to cut me down," Miara continued, her gaze unwavering. "But love doesn't shrink, it grows. And from that growth emerges strength, resilience, and an unyielding commitment to justice." As she concluded her speech, the audience rose to their feet, the ovation echoing throughout the auditorium. Tears welled in Mara's eyes, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming sense of empowerment that enveloped her. Later that evening, in the quiet sanctuary of her room, Miara opened a small glass box that sat atop her dresser. Inside lay the braid that had been forcibly taken from her months ago. But now it was not a symbol of loss or humiliation. It was a testament to her journey, a tangible reminder of the battles fought and the victories won. She traced her fingers over the braid, a soft smile gracing her lips. Closing the box, she placed it back on the dresser, turning to gaze out the window at the night sky. The stars twinkled with promise, each one a beacon of hope and endless possibilities. Miara O'Neal had not only grown back, she had risen. If this story made you feel something, don't let that feeling fade. Start a conversation that makes someone uncomfortable. Challenge the silence when it's easier to stay quiet. Share this story in rooms where it's never been told. Because change doesn't start with permission. It starts with you.